Within Humanity's chapter, different human societies rose to prominence. The following human society discussed is the self-proclaimed Interstellar Authority of Port Phillips, and this document contains all information known about the IAPP before the year 2200, the recognized year in which the human chapter officially began. On March 27, 2087, the first Ark ship Elcano entered orbit above Port Phillips. Already discovered by Rogue 1, or simply USS Venture, later surveys by both drones and smaller science vessels discovered that the continental world had few notable features. To the human eye, it seemed that this world would be a wonderful first colony. On March 29, 2087, under UN Colony Governor Rohan Dar, the Elcano gently touched down at the mouth of a large river delta upon the continent of Penotia. The temperate, forested area provided shelter and easy access to raw materials essential in initial stages of colonization. Within the week, countless tents were scattered across the colony ship's surroundings, the inside turning into the capital's headquarters. 150,000 human settlers arrived on the colony ship, with around 40,000 venturing outwards in the continent, and the other 25,000 scattering across the vast planet to found their own small towns and outposts. Notably, many of the arriving colonists were specialized in many fields, but one of the most dominating were construction workers. Infrastructure for efficient mining, farming, energy, all takes time to establish. Meanwhile, while mass space commuting is not yet readily available, there still remains countless smaller vessels which will be transporting vast amounts of goods and resources, including people, to the colony. Thus, it was important to build places for Earthian resources to arrive, more important than immediately extracting resources planetside. Another large number of colonists arriving were botanists and initial wildlife explorers sent by the UN. Being the first colonial world in human history, many concerns remain that the vast wildlife of Port Phillips may not be able to support human life, whether it be from the soil not containing the right nutrients, to perhaps plant life being unable to set root for some other unknown reasons. Luckily for them, the new habitat was at worst tolerable for many across the colony. Whatever the case, the 2090s were quiet. Vast amounts of infrastructure planning began while construction projects dotted the planet. Countless space airports, local airports, resource storage centers, power networks, all were beginning to be built across the planet. While not yet profitable because of the lack of colonists, the projects were heavily financed by the various nations of Earth dominated by the UN organization. Often, different airports were named by their construction crew's origins. Airport Paris would become the leading infrastructure for Port Phillips Air Organization, while Airport Boston would become the leading one for Kirkland, another major city developed by the Kirkland Construction Company. The early 2100s saw continued development. With these vast airports and global networked infrastructure completed, new small towns and cities were built surrounding them. Within them were countless mines, generator facilities, farming zones, all prepared for vast colonization efforts. The overextended cities also meant that a larger and larger military presence would need to arrive to take watch over these ghost towns, while the larger colonies would bring reinforcements with each one. These soldiers arrived under the organization of Hugo Delano. The 2100s also saw the arrival of more and more immigrants. Many of them either used national programs or the slowly strengthening UN program to arrive. Most had to be well trained and specialized in their field, compared to the later art programs in which quality depended on the colony ship financing. Lastly, the early 2100s also saw the first issues with the wormhole, largely discussed within the Before the Beginning episode, that saw the formalization of the Republic of Port Phillips in its first local 4-year election. Unsurprisingly, Rohan Dar won that issue. This also saw the formation of the Port Phillips Assembly, where various ethnic and regional representatives were elected to help administer the planet. Instead, most of the problems at home got debated here, and little progress came from them. Notably, the few bills they voted for stripped the governor of many of his previous powers, including emergency powers. The end of the 2100s saw the rise of the Ark program itself, largely in concept or waiting for reorganization. This period saw the great ship dockyards of older days finally get converted into Ark ship dockyards. Elcano's older vessel became the model of what would become a global program, and to Port Phillips, this was an essential win. While none of the major ones would be built in time to arrive, they nevertheless were an important political win for the land's government. The governor helped oversee the selection of the various sites for the colony ships, always using the hard-won global infrastructure designed years ago. Because of the lack of resource distraction, and concerns that the planet's current infrastructure could still be overwhelmed by each ARC ship's arrival, it was decided during the initial stages of the program that all ARC ships would be partially supplied with the resources needed to establish these beachheads successfully, and that each ARC ship would be designed to operate as regional planetary capitals. After this stage of colonization, however, the newer ships built would be those capable of numerous concurrent journeys without the bulky food stockpiles. Thus, the ships were packed with the expectation that they would be resupplied within 8 months, but have no assistance beforehand. This 8 months plan ended up saving the lives of millions, while a small portion would nearly be doomed to a tragic end. Many honors feared that the nation-states of old would bring their ancient petty rivalries to Port Phillips. Even with the successes of the UN, the global project was nevertheless a new one, and the chance for global chaos remained. They would never see these fears realized, however. In 2110, around the 26th anniversary of the wormhole's exploration, communications were muzzled. As discussed previously, the government struggled to respond to the crisis, while the governor himself was unable to take emergency actions. Days after Assembly failed an emergency funding bill, Marshal Larry Polk couped the nation and imprisoned Rohandar, and survived a counter-coup launched by Hugo Galano. Port Phillips soon struggled with many basic needs. Planetary infrastructure was built around a consistent and ever-growing imports of resources and people from Earth, and without that, famine and warfare became ever more common. As the military slowly strengthened its power over the colony and important cities, a police state was initially built to quell dissent, but it was slowly worn down because of how large the quagmire the planet was in. As famine became ever present, the vast construction ambitions across the planet abandoned, and disorganization rampant, the military began using what was called the corvée system, forcibly moving massive populations across the planet. They were able to avoid complete starvation by forcing various populations to work in industries necessary for survival. As of 2112, the megacity of Port Phillips itself was secure, and the surrounding countryside enough to feed its populace. Soon after, Polk would be assassinated, and his regime in limbo would teeter near collapse. The man to take his place was Marshal Vincent Gleason, a member of the Old Guard of the UN exiled for his actions in Egypt during their older Cold War. Old and tired, he nevertheless maintained a ruthless grip on power. He hoped to hold elections after he secured more control of the planet, even declaring the independence of the Republic of Port Phillips in preparation for this. Sadly for him, he wouldn't live to see his planned elections, and many believed his apprehension of holding new ones doomed any chance of democracy. For 4 years he struggled to maintain control. Previously, the garrison was a mishmash of younger local recruits, better trained Ursian soldiers who moved in with their families to the colony, and an older Ursian general staff. Internal conflict reminiscent of national conflicts began to grow, as the different smaller towns and cities around the port began to skirmish with each other, each pulling favors and building their ties in the city, hoping to strengthen their position. Meanwhile, these military cliques would join in that once in a while, claiming loyalty to the Marshal while undermining his rule. For these 4 years, much of his post-collapse work was balancing these factions out, and slowly weakening them. In 2116, he made a deadly gamble, and broke down the different cliques, firing much of the Ursian staff who disagreed, and breaking and rebuilding countless divisions. He then promoted many younger officers who were cranked out of the various new Port Phillips military colleges. This led to the notorious officer revolts, where multiple divisions of soldiers tried to seize the port away from the local garrison. They failed, and soon their forces fled south of the equator. As of 2118, the planet was divided into 3. A bit north of the equator sat Port Phillips, sitting upon a delta connecting the largest continent of Pannotia. While they controlled around 15% of the planet at this time, most of the rest were smaller cities and towns which sprung up during the initial stages of colonization. Much of the rest of the planet had massive sprawling ghost towns, most prepared for the ARC ships that never came. On the other side of the planet, the former coup plotters built themselves a new outpost, growing the former company city of Kirkland. Declaring themselves the national state of Port Phillips, they claimed that democracy was dead, and that only their government was a legitimate one. As the end of 2121 came along, the Marshal would peacefully pass into sleep. Another Marshal, Trebini Mamby, would take his place. On December 7, 2121, he declared the Republic dead and announced the formation of the Interstellar Authority of Port Phillips. Corruption soon began to grow, while as the years went on, nationalistic propaganda was felt across their entire society, building the idea of a human identity, mostly revolving around martial prowess and a willingness to sacrifice for the state. Many across the planet hoped that his ascension would lead to the peaceful reunification of the planet, but the national state decried his rule as illegitimate, and the same was done by Mamby. Over the next couple decades, these two nation-states slowly grew and consolidated the various territories of the planet, until in 2152, where the Port Phillips Unification War kicked off. As the two giants finally met border to border, claims soon were launched. An invasion force from Kirkland was sent to seize the port. 55,000 soldiers strong spearheaded the assault. It was widely believed that Port Phillips falling would lead to the Interstellar Authority's collapse. This failed, as the Battle of London Borough saw this force encircled and crushed by Bambi's forces in a daring maneuver. This rapid victory saw the war end almost as quickly as it began, and soon their forces occupied Kirkland itself. A civil war that many believed could last for as long as the World Wars did, ended just like that. Well, it wasn't so simple. While approaching the gates of Kirkland, Bambi made it quite clear that any opposition would be crushed, while any surrender or collaboration would be seen as a welcome integration back into the true authority. This ruthless and merciful stance led to most opposition crumbling, and Kirkland's state would soon collapse from betrayal and cowardice. For decades, the new state would be rebuilt, countless of these abandoned cities refurbished and colonized, the older, broken planetary infrastructure rebuilt, the destroyed highways restored. The vast infrastructure led to a meteoric rise following the Civil War, and population programs saw the amount of people boom over the generations, while the corvée system organized the economy and fanatically nationalistic propaganda reassured the populace of the state's authority. As of 2200, the military remains in its dominant position over the state. Fanatically militaristic and overtly authoritarian, the military junta is currently led by Lesibu Mambi, the son of the dictatorial Tribini Mambi. Under his rule, the state continues to use the corvée system over the populace, while using nationalistic propaganda to cover up any faults within his administration. There are growing tensions remain internally between the ascendant military and the scheming civilian bureaucracy, who maintains a seemingly tight grip on power. As long as no political challenger tries to oust him, he has no reason to change status quo, and instead seeks to continue his father's legacy as a military strongman. The memories of the old republic have long faded away in most minds. Many of those who remember only recalling government propaganda telling the story of abstract poverty and inaction in an age of desperation. A few still old enough to tell the story of the successful UN mandate are now forgotten, or can only reach a few family members. While democracy is not in the minds of the people, many wonder whether the self-proclaimed admiral will remain in charge at all. His father held much more control over the military, while the bureaucracy was certainly much weaker before Lesibu's ascent to power. Many hope that perhaps the bureaucracy itself will be broken down alongside the corvée system. Meanwhile, many others hope the military doesn't foolishly doom the state to destruction from their aggressive nature, instead hoping that the state will rule in. Population, unknown both to themselves and to the government, seem to be divided just like the government is. So one major faction being sidelined may lead to internal chaos. For those in 2200, however, only time could tell what would happen. This was a Curator catalog on IAPP's history before 2200. Access further Curator archives to find their recorded history. The dimension it takes place in will be stated before the rest of the document is discussed.